cultural institutions exist to house the collective wisdom of the civilization and make that wisdom accessible to the average man in whatever circumstances he might need to tap into it. But when those cultural institutions and their leaders betray that trust, assisted by government, civilizational wisdom is lost, and it is individuals who begin to lose access to the value of what our grandparents knew and what their grandparents knew and how they all came to know that through pain and suffering and mistakes. You learn as you go. Politics, it's this crazy dynamic ocean. There's trauma, there's drama, there's levels of intensity that are more intense than intensity. There's all kinds of clashes, from immigration to census counts to redistricting to grand jury indictments. It is crazy. But what's the real meaning of all of this? How do we get to all this? Is it just the political version of ESPN's top 10 sports moments each day? Was there something else at play? Well, on their own, politics, they're nothing more than just that. They're just politics, arguing over what's the best policy and all of that. But oftentimes it's with unscrupulous men shifting and manipulating affairs, ultimately for their own personal advantage, aimed at both money and power, or one or the other. It's why at most Catholic masses, for example, each day, and especially on major days, we pray out loud for political leaders because they're so susceptible to becoming corrupt because of all the power they have. But something has happened to the society, meaning to people, to individuals, to parents, to children, as the politics has been directed towards self-interest all these past decades. And it's not just up there in the ethers, society in some conceptual way, but in the actual day-to-day lives of real living and breathing individuals every day. They, we, us, those we love, have to a degree become victimized by all of this scheming and wheeling and dealing that's become so commonplace as the federal government and many state governments they've become so ingratiated in our daily lives. We need to look back no further than COVID, and that's just one example, and the government response to it, which so disrupted everything in almost everyone's lives, except, of course, government leaders. They didn't pay a price for anything. COVID and the response had the way paved for it by decades of government corruption, from Fauci and his bullshit sidestepping of the system to conduct all of that illegal gain-of-function research with your tax dollars that he just shipped offshore to China because it was illegal here in the U.S. But he still used your money. But that whole thing, all of it, COVID, the deaths, the shutdowns, the masks, the lie, you can't do this, you can't do that, you're going to get your job, you lose your job, all that stuff, all of it, that's just one example out of hundreds of how the government has moved into such a powerful position of control. That's the first one. And the second one is they've created an environment of fear or uncertainty, but certainly total loss of trust in the cultural institutions. And it hasn't just caused a lack of trust in those institutions, it has corrupted them. Education, media, the courts, to name three of the more prominent ones. Those institutions exist so that when people need to turn to them, they can help the individual. Cultural institutions exist to house the collective wisdom of the civilization and make that wisdom accessible to the average man in whatever circumstances he might need to tap into it. But when those cultural institutions and their leaders betray that trust, assisted by government, civilizational wisdom is lost, and it is individuals who begin to lose access to the value of what our grandparents knew and what their grandparents knew and how they all came to know that through pain and suffering and mistakes. You learn as you go, and they're throwing that overboard. Our touchstone has become obscured, and eventually it gets forgotten. So without that knowledge, without that wisdom, is it any wonder that so many people feel lost, abandoned, isolated, flailing about, all of it, cast around in a sea of uncertainty, and they turn to drugs and sex and alcohol and all of it? All this corruption at higher levels, it has a real knock-on effect down the road. It affects these the impact of all this, the effects of it, trickle into the individual lives of people that increase the already abundant supply of just normal problems in people's lives, like people used to have, 400 years ago. This corruption causes families ultimately to disintegrate. Foundational aspects of life, they evaporate. And the next generation, our children, they absorb all of this into their little sponge-like minds. They most of them don't have the brain power, at least at that age, to articulate the instability they feel, going back and forth between parents, going from this school to that school. They sit in this class, they learn all kinds of crazy crap. That's all because of corruption. But they feel it even if they can't articulate it. This is why people, political and institutional leaders who pervert the institutions, they're repurposing them for their own personal ideological gain. It's why they must pay a price, and not just any price, but a heavy price for their misdeeds. They are destroying not just civilization, which exists up here, but our children, individual lives in the day-to-day. They need to pay as part of what any solution to all of this would ultimately look like. Coming to you from Houston, Texas, I'm Gary Michael Voris. God love you.